because maybe you don't want to fight bosses, maybe you don't want to fight other players, but I mean, who says no to a power up if it's just there on the ground? Might as well take it just to be safe and then go on with your harvesting, right? Is
Yeah.
kind of the thought. It's leveling up always feels good, even if it gets taken away from you when you leave the slip world.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Game Engineering Podcast. Today I am joined by Hans, a lead game designer working on Providence, an upcoming game from Dynasty Studios. It's very difficult to summarize Providence in one short sentence. In the very essence, it's an extraction shooter game, but it also focuses heavily on the exploration of the worlds during the extraction period, which contains both PvE and PvP elements, and on top of that, Providence aims to be a first game where the blockchain technology is used properly, not as a foundation of gameplay, but as an enhancement of it. And Hans has a lot of thoughts how things should be done and designed, and I'm exploring with him this space. If you're interested to see how one of the most ambitious upcoming games is being developed and designed, join me for this discussion. And with that, let's meet Hans. Tell me a little bit about Providence, what it is, so that everybody who listens will have a fair idea.
Sure thing. I'll try and do my best in a quick explanation for an elevator pitch that I did not prepare. So Providence, at its core, is a survival game with mixes of roguelike elements and extraction elements, but within more of a MMO-esque structure where we are hoping for players to trade, or we're planning for players to trade the resources that they extract from what we call slip worlds back to their homesteads, where they craft, build, and progress as you would in the survival game, and then make sure that the progression is stitched systemically in a way where there's a high demand for a certain amount of resources. Then there's kind of like specific resources everyone needs for progressing horizontally in different directions. And then there's some scarcity and rarity in certain resources that bring some fun elements through the blockchain in. So that players should kind of like trade for the core needs, but also for like the icing on the cake for the rare cherries that you will pick now and then. And I guess, that is one of the unique things that we're working with here at Dynasty. We're trying to make one of the first like proper Web3 integrated games using blockchain to enhance a game. But at its core, the game should be really fun without the blockchain, and the blockchain should only kind of enhance the experience.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So for the core loop, do I get this right? You have like a base where is your safe place, and then you can launch into the slip world, like SLIP, right? Slip world.
Yes, like it's slipping away.
And then this is time limited, time boxed. So you launch there, and you can do this in a party of up to 4 now players, I think.
Yes, that is the current plan.
You launch there, gather resources, fight the enemies you meet there, fight the other players that also were there.
Maybe, you can choose
if you meet them, or somehow collaborate with them, right? And then, provided you have fun stuff that you searched for, found, maybe even received from the dead bodies and corpses of the enemies that you slaughtered, you come back. And then you do this cycle. So like an extraction shooter cycle, a game loop with lots of additional things.
Yes, I would say very much so. So unlike extraction games, which are very, I would say, more of a hardcore fan base, and is very focused on the thrill of, PvP is very much what it kind of lives on. We were inspired by some of the more accessible extraction games. At least it wasn't like those were the first games we looked at, but we realized at some point that this whole like going to a place and taking it somewhere else was a lot of what you're kind of seeing in extraction games as well. We looked at games like Dark and Darker, for example, and even Sea of Thieves, where it's a lot of like, well, you need to go on these like expeditions almost, and you have PvP content, and you're looking for various things to then bring back with you home to progress. And you're not necessarily there to fight over an objective or be against each other. You're more sense that here's a world with, the rewards, challenges, and other players. And that doesn't mean enemies. You're not competing for stuff. There are, for example, big bosses in our game, which is some of the kind of like high-end content players. You will be farming more over and over. It will be more challenging, more difficult. And the players don't have to fight over these, but there are only X amount of them within this, the lifetime of a slip world. And therefore, like, you can either collaborate, you can wait, or you can find, another place where it spawns, or you could try and steal the loot from someone else, right? And the overall goal does become this emerging gameplay that you see so nicely in both extraction games, but also survival game. The whole, the open exploration, you don't really know exactly what you get, what you play, but you understand the systemics of the world. You know which places you get where, what things you should do to progress in certain ways, and how you should deal with different challenges. But everything is positioned in new ways due to procedural generation, due to players playing the game in a different way, and unforeseen elements, right?
Yeah. Okay. So, provided that you're in a group of party, right? I'm assuming that you're communicating by voice, either in game or out of the game, right? Within the party. If you, what do you see as a proper means of communication with other parties that you might meet on the Slip world?
We are definitely planning to have both proximity voice chat and written chat that have been seen working quite well in games like Sea of Thieves and DayZ. But we are also to get that sense of what we call a shared world. Like, we're actually not seeing this as a PvP game, even though PvP is an option. We're not through design trying to get the players to fight. We're trying to get them the experience that there's a world that's alive, right? Because while we're taking a lot of elements and being inspired by MMOs, we can definitely not compare ourselves to traditional MMOs and call us that. It's much more like maybe like even Path of Exile, for example, it has a sprawling economy, and you have players meeting each other within a hub, but otherwise you live in each of your own small hideouts, I think they call it, and you can visit each other there, and then you go to your maps and do them alone. I think we're very similar, only that our maps are shared, and because we are very heavily focused on exploration, that is a big part of kind of like survival experience. We're trying to add a lot of elements that always gives you that impression of, you're not there alone. And it gives you just that awe and wonder of someone was here earlier. What did they do? Someone has been building here. Someone has been chopping down the trees. Someone has been fighting creatures, or I can hear people in the distance, or I can see their dropship fly in or fly out. They're just getting the sense of activity adds a lot more to the world, and that's what we're trying to live in. And with the communication, we're trying to do things like, for example, we recently implemented the ability to revive each other within a team. But we also have a nice little Boolean that we check that, it doesn't have to be team exclusive. So now people from other teams can actually also revive you. And we used to have this feature that when you died, you would send up a flare. Like, you could choose to send up a flare just to be like, yeah, there's activity over here. Come join in. And now suddenly that one makes a lot more sense if you can send a flare when you get down instead of you die, because you can be like my party members know where I am, sure, but you can tell that maybe they're too far away. Send up a flare. Maybe someone else nearby will see it, both like in the sky, like as a visual effect, but also as it can ping you essentially. And that ping can, instead of having just for your team, it could happen for anyone globally. Be like, oh, there's like an SOS signal over there. Let's go steal his loot, or let's go revive him, and then hold him at gunpoint and ask for some loot, or just be like, hey man, I'm here to help out. That is kind of for the players to decide. There's of course a lot to consider with the I think some of the biggest questions that we get, or most frequent question get asked, is things are living on the blockchain. That will mean that a lot of things are NFTs that you own these items, right? Will some of them be limited? Yes, not all items in the game will be limited. We're trying very much to do so that we don't end up with a limited player base. So there'll be a lot of unlimited resources, but also some limited. And at least all of them are hard acquired, right? You need to go to a slip world to actually get them, or you need to trade yourself for some of them. And with that, we always need to keep in mind that we don't want the PvP to ruin the game. And there's a lot of considerations there to take. But I think at the same time, also, like, we're trying to look at our segment of players. And while you'll have power hungry people, you also have a lot of people who just like to, help out. Like, that's equally amount of fun just to be like, yeah, I want to give this person something. I think as long as people love a game, you'll see both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, I was wondering, I think I heard when they made Journey, they had lots of iterations on the communication between the players just to be sure that the players cannot use this to actually trick the players and like be annoying and like be, they wanted for this communication to be positive and one player helping another go through the journey. So I was wondering, like, do you have any expectations how many of the players will be the cooperative ones, how many will be the helpful ones, and how many will be like the power hungry mad people? And do you have any strategies to like skew the game into one direction if it's too big of a let's say power hungry mob?
I think that it's not something we have clear predictions of right now. We are aware of both, and we're making sure that both player types should be able to have a good time in the game. But since we're aware of both, we also have like a full list of like, yeah, these are the features we'd like to like that could help us in certain situations, right? So like we don't necessarily need PvP for a world to feel alive, but if we don't have PvP, we also like removing a big aspect of like the type of interactions players can have with each other, right? But you could consider things like having unique areas within the game where there's PvP. Like you need to move across this border. Not until then is there PvP. Is some options we have. So like you can kind of like exist around that more in safety, and you can go in there to maybe get unique resources you can't get elsewhere. Other options are also kind of like, since we're looking at a game with horizontal progression, players will exist in different parts of the games for what their own reason, which is something we're working on. But that means that we can choose to have biomes. We choose to have slip worlds. I guess I did mention that. So the slip worlds, we're intending for them to have like one biome. So you would have like the forest slip world, the desert slip world, the frozen tundra, the jungle, the swamp, the meteorite belt you just fly around or whatever. Like right now we're going with a lot of, I would say more classic, but with the alien twist, and then moving into the more craziness later on. Just because there's something very nice about exploring a more, a homely place, even if it does have scary creatures or players in it. So I think with the different slip worlds, we can also choose to do, well, this slip world only has 12 players instead of 24. This slip world maybe doesn't have PvP at all. Like we can almost treat them as game modes in a sense. And then the type of content that you can find on there is something we can control. It's actually something we're working on kind of right now. Like we're working on like server scaling and matchmaking and world generation and picking between them. And that it's a lot of things that needs to come together, right? But it's also quite exciting that now we've worked a lot of the backend tools, and you can start thinking about like, yeah, well, now we procedurally generate both deserts and forests. And if I spend the time on just making one that's a bit smaller, I need to think about, well, okay, needs to be fewer POIs, there needs to be fewer creatures, like kind of like scaling down everything in to match a size. That's going to change the experience as well, right? You're going to have a bigger world with fewer players. That means probably less PvP to meet each other, but there's less of that just hunting each other.
Okay. Do you plan a lot of like base building or things like that? Like where when you're in a safe place, you gathered all the resources, and then you're doing your own thing in sort of like a maybe Valheim. Maybe there are probably better games but like you're building your base.
Valheim is a great game. Yeah. Yes, that is
Valheim is
very.
the great game. Maybe it wasn't the best example because you don't have the separation for the base,
Yeah,
right? Like you don't have this.
it is a bit. So maybe we can talk a bit about those part of Survivor, right? Because Valheim, that was actually a very great GDC talk from one of their programmers, I think this year or last year, that talked about just Valheim's kind of journey and the plans and how Iron Gate works as a studio and stuff like that. And he talks about like the game was very much designed to be, well, it should fit a lot of player types, and you don't have to always fit into all of the different pillars to have fun. So very often players will like join the same server either at the same time or individually. And some players just like exploring, some just like combat, some just like building, some just wants to chop trees, like kind of having some parts of the game that can almost just exist on their own without needing the rest. And they have I would say, a rich building system. It's definitely one of my favorite, even though it has its quirks and stuff. It's one of my favorite building systems, and it was one of the inspirations from this game. But there, everything kind of coexists, right? And we have building kind of outside of the slip worlds. Um, Now, we of course have been discussing the prospects of having some sort of more like permanent building on slip worlds in the future, but it's not how we're currently seeing it. So it's more like this is where the player will express their progression in the game, like the bigger, the sturdier, and the, or let's say, decorated and colorful your base goes, the more you progress. That's just nice. Of like this, you're getting more armor and stats and going to more places. Is one part of the kind of need for building, but also just the fact of creative outlet, right? Like it's nice that if you can find, I don't know, the couch with pillow cushions that no one else has, or only 500 other people has, right? From a blockchain standpoint, and with economy, we can trade stuff. No one really needs that couch, right? Like it's not something that breaks the game if you don't have that couch, but it's kind of cool if you own a couch that has, I don't know, your face on it or whatever, right? We could end up having. And so our building system is something that we kind of have a fundament for right now, but it's also something that we're not focusing on at the moment because mostly, if you think about Valheim, for example, you do have like, expanding the size, adding so that instead of just having a wooden building, you can make rock and stuff like that. And they do have things like their bases get attacked. So if you actually go for the sturdier materials, you'll probably have your base destroyed less often. But most of the people just want their stations to function. Like that is the core thing that actually progresses. The players getting crafting stations and the upgrades to the crafting stations. And that's also where we are starting, right? Like we need to make sure that the game progresses is the way we need. And then we can bring things to the homesteads, our safe space eventually, that kind of creates a kind of a law of order for how should you architecturally design your homes. Most often that is something like if you just let the players build whatever, you as a player kind of lack a problem to solve. It just becomes, how do I make things looking nice? And it can be a bit too open. Sometimes you need rules like, well, you need a roof, otherwise it's going to rain on your campfire. Or you need windows so that the smoke can come out. Those things are nice and easily understandable in Valheim, and it helps just from following those rules. You end up with a building that doesn't look like a box, but actually looks like a home. And that's not everyone is good at building or thinking about those things, but they can like force you into making it feeling like a home, which is important.
This
And
is
so
super smart. I did not think about this. That
that is why you have,
they forced me to make a window so that I don't live in a basement. This
yeah,
is
basically.
super cool.
Exactly. And then suddenly, the sun comes up because you were suffocating from your smoke throughout the night.
Yes.
Well, you're like, oh, super annoyed at this building system. But then suddenly, it works and the sun comes up and like the music changes and it's like, it's blissful. And then you're like, oh, nice. I should make more windows and I should get chop more trees. And
Exactly.
it's kind of like a positive reinforcement loop that they have right
Exactly.
there. And we have a lot of ideas for how we could do such thing in a like fantasy sci-fi universe. But again, it's kind of that thing on top to begin with. Is if it's just fun to go and explore and fight, that's gonna that's the step worlds, and it's gonna help a lot of players. And then you can make stations and progress. We can work on the kind of like those things for the building later on. So it's a thing that has massive potential, and something we're not really forgetting, but it's just not first or not played. So I can't go as much into detail, but at least I can tell you about some of the stuff we're
I
thinking
think
from design.
yeah, okay. I think that's a lot about the homesteads, and it gives me fair idea. And also, if you mentioned that the couch with my face on it, I'm
Mhm.
expecting that I could be able to visit my friends' homesteads, right? Like
Yeah,
to
for
show
sure.
off
We need something like this.
to show
Yes,
off
I
my
think like most games that have like parties like this where you venture into some place together, like Deep Rock Galactic or Helldivers 2, a more recent and very popular one. Like you visit each other's lobbies in a sense, and I don't think either of them have like personalization, or maybe Deep Rock does at this point. They're growing their game a lot. But you do have like personal progression. So like some of them have like a bigger hangar and their ship and stuff like that. And it's just, you could just, go into a menu and then you meet each other on the world, but there's that sense of meeting up together that just creates this social thing, and you have some emotes and the music, like it becomes much more of a social experience, even if it's not even, you could play the game without it. You could just press play, get random players, exist in the slip world together. But we definitely want though, like you visit each other's home, you see each other's armors hanging on armor racks on the walls, and when mousing over them, you can see like their tool tips, and you can see when they were crafted, and maybe one of them was crafted by, like I could have one crafted by my colleague Casper or something like
yeah.
that, and it could say that, and it could say which date, and maybe it was crafted by him, but then you put a different color on it. Like that's some of the small intricacies of the blockchain that, even again, it doesn't, have new gameplay mechanics. You've seen similar things like in World of Warcraft. You had the name of someone who crafted it, but now it's like it's also kind of forever, right? Like it's on the blockchain. You wouldn't be able to actually read these things outside of the game. If you go into your wallet in external sources, you can see these like as attributes on a digital item, which is kind of
Yeah.
cool.
So
Yeah.
we can maybe linger on the blockchain idea, because
Yeah.
first of all, I think that Providence in the idea is like the best game to use blockchain because of its insistence on the emergent gameplay, right? So all of the stuff that happened can be now recorded and
Yeah.
then like shown what happened. So like the more emergent stuff you have, the more you want to record it somehow and then show other people. So this is amazing in this regard. That how much do you think you want to push blockchain in general for the gameplay? Like where do you see blockchain fit? Where it's too much of the blockchain, for example, to drive the gameplay?
Hmm. I mean, as since I'm also the game designer, it's gonna be like, as long as the blockchain doesn't break the game or cause any cases where players are finding anything unfair due to it. So with an open economy and with the possibility of having things that are limited on the blockchain, uh, we're I think the two biggest things we're kind of concerned about is, well, one, pay to win, which I don't think is a definitive thing if you have it or not. I think it's on a scalar. Because you can also like pay to skip time, and you can actually pay for actual power. It's kind of like a bit different, and we're gonna try and stay as far away from the buying power as possible, and more like buying experiences, buying customization. But it's gonna skip time. It's also not buying. We're not selling anything. You're gonna trade it with other players, and we'll take like a small cut from player trading, which is kind of like the idea. It's almost like all of the microtransactions are player driven, right? Which is also kind of a cool idea. And then the next thing with the blockchain is like, yeah, because things are limited, we don't want any of the like, let's call it the base, the core game, to suddenly not be accessible because this item no longer exists. All of the resources were spent on something, right? So there's a kind of a ground layer of the game that needs to exist without the blockchain, even if every item is on the blockchain. And then there's all the kind of this stuff on top, like the couch with your face on it. And I think that like just trading and more custom things is some of the simpler things to envision with the blockchain. But there's a lot of ideas that we have that I don't think, like, we're starting with the basics, right? But I still don't. I think most of our ideas could still easily work in here. We have things like, well, players could craft a full set of armor, and then they could put it up for not just for trading, but you could subscribe to it, right? Like you pay me X amount of resources for X amount of time, and these items are now for you to use for this amount of time. Like you subscribe to it like a suit, so you can play with it. You could also have things like, well, I want to try your, like, before buying the movie on Blockbuster or whatever, you need to see the trailer. Well, this could be like, yeah, you can play one slip world with it for like a
Nice.
small cost, and then you could subscribe afterwards. Like those are some ideas that I think are kind of interesting. Now you could suddenly have players that they're just trying to make as many of the same loadout as possible because people really want to play with it. And I think more and more you're seeing a demographic that I probably myself fit into. That is, I've been playing games since I was like since I was born, probably, right? Like I'm 30 now. I remember playing video games like on a PC myself since I was 8, which was Diablo 2, my favorite game ever. But I was also watching my dad play Diablo 1 while sitting on his lap when I was 1 year old, right? So like for me, I cannot play game to the extent that I mostly want anymore, but I do want to try a game maybe in its fullest. So if I came up with a kind of scenario we're trying to solve here, it's like, well, let's say that one of my colleagues invited me to, oh, do you want to join a raid in WoW? I'm like, well, I only have 2 hours of this time frame, and also I'm not like even level up. I don't have my character. But if the content was just simple enough, I could probably get like a 5-minute explanation video alongside of like a character that I could play with 2 hours. And then I'd had a good time just playing with him. Even if I don't care much about the progression and stuff, it would be kind of like, going to watch a movie or, I don't know, going to an escape room. It's more like, then it's just an experience, more kind of a narrow one. And maybe an MMO is a bad example. But something like, I don't know, extraction shooter, it might work, right? Like I lost all my equipment, but my friends didn't. And I just kind of want to play with them instead of having to grind. Kind of just play a bit with you tonight because then I can grind for the weekend and have my own equipment for the next weekend we're playing, right? So for myself, I don't have a lot of time. Maybe it would be nice to subscribe to a loadout is one of the ideas. And we have things like other ideas, like I think the emerging gameplay you said is really cool. Something like, imagine that the crafting recipes you can find in the world, that like if after looting that you kind of do a quest, now you get a variation of that item, right? Like it gets colored in a certain way, or it gets extra stats, or like essentially like looking at the emerging gameplay and not only just having that story that you can kind of like read the events that happened with it, but it actually being able to affect the outcome is also an interesting idea. And there, I have kind of like a half-assed idea that is definitely not fully stitched together, but one thing that at least I've kind of been wanting to get into the game somehow is an inspiration from Diablo 2, where on the BattleNet you had something where you could go into a map and it would say like, oh yeah, 1,253 is sold, like Stone of Jordan, which is like a unique ring, has been sold to vendors. And then when there was enough of them, the Diablo would, like a specific boss, would essentially now spawn anywhere in the world, and you would have to explore to find that boss, and it would now drop an item you could not get else anywhere. And this idea that there's like stuff that everyone is trading and doing stuff with, suddenly triggering events, I think is super cool. And those could be either events that the game is triggering on their own from reading from the blockchain, or something where we as developers just look at like kind of events happening amongst the community and then kind of tailoring experiences to you. Stuff like that I'd really want.
It's a next level emergent gameplay.
Exactly. And it's like right now we're still working on the fundamentals of the game, right? Just making sure that this is fun for the first 30 hours for anyone who's been playing survival games for the past 8 years, or someone where it's the first video game that they play or something like that. And then content like this is not really what you focus on, right? Like we make sure to have the ideas so that we are not making a game that doesn't suit them in the future. But it's definitely not what we're focusing on, right? Because it's also like, yeah, you might experience that, don't know, 3 times a year, and that's not the most amount of content for our development time.
It seems like you're building a like a next level of World of Warcraft marketplace where you trade all of the stuff that you have, and then like usually in World of Warcraft you could only go, for example, go mining, get the
Mm.
mine stuff, then sell it, or like use it for blacksmithing and then sell it, and you're
Hmm.
building on top of these more layers. I was wondering, have you already tried some simulations? What would happen if, for example, having some items on the blockchain, you would have a player who is very wealthy and is trying to like, break the system or
Hmm.
things like that? Have you tried that, or do you already see like what's the limitation and where are there?
We see the limit. Like we definitely know all the kind of things that could go wrong, like an economy that could break the game essentially, right? And it's the red flags that we are looking at. Like we don't want people to corner the market for anything that's fundamental. We want to make sure that the things we're working on right now, if someone plays the game in 5 years, like after launch, that still works regardless of anyone buying all of the wood or something like that, because there should be enough wood always. Um, we're not running simulation yet. We're trying every day. So like we're like this close. And I think we have like 9 key points that is like this is everything in the game that has blockchain to make sure that it works. And we're doing that like on a test scenario. And once that is kind of done, and also one thing is like testing it for like breaking the game, but another thing is also stress testing it on the blockchain to make sure that transactions are not taking too long, are not too expensive. Like that's also something for us to think about, right? Because the blockchain is not for free to utilize either. So we're not running simulations yet, but that is what we're moving towards.
Okay.
We can do it on like spreadsheets and stuff, but that's another thing.
Okay. I was wondering regarding the playtests. You've already done a
Yes.
couple of playtests, and
Mm-hmm.
from a designer perspective, what do you think about like design? First of all, you have a bit that you want to test, like playtest. So what kind of questions you first want answered, and how do you make sure that this bit, like the loop that you have, for example, will answer them? How do you get the information? Like, I was, I'm asking both, like technically in general and in the case of Providence playtest, how did it
Yeah.
work out?
So I would say that we're very happy with the results of our playtests, but they were by no means perfect. Like a lot more things could have been done if the main purpose was kind of data collection and information, which was not just the case. There was also a bit of marketing involved. There's a bit of just making sure like we're kind of testing some things early, both in directions of design, but also making sure that some of the fundamentals of the game is kind of built up, sound like more on the tech side works before starting to expand on everything that goes on top, and then a bit of like also hitting like investor interests and stuff like that, like making sure that we kind of have some milestones to show off. So we were all very happy with the playtest. We could have got a lot more probably information if we integrated more analytics, if we worked on, I guess, maybe improving the content. Like it can always be improved on, but that's also like a trap because often you're developing something specific for playtest and let's say wasting a bit of time on that instead of working on the game, finding temporary solutions. But overall, like we had a bunch of like just presenting the game more to individual groups here and then, which was more just showing the latest part and then getting some feedback on it, which have been more like, I think, getting some immediate feedbacks on some changes and more like time with the people where we would actually play with some people instead of just put something out there that people could play and then get feedback on. But then on top of that, we've had, I'm trying to count how many playtests right now. We had the first one in May last year at the Avalanche Summit where we had like 10 PCs and it was like the first small static level. You could go fight each other, harvest resource, fight a boss, and that was it. There was no like homes that you went to. There was no progression. There was no crafting equipment, anything like that. And what we were testing there was just the sense of like early replication steps. Like, okay, we had just added like teams. We just added some like the aspects of multiplayer. That's like, okay, bullets where do they exist on client and server? Does movement feel good? What about the camera? Like just really down to the fundamentals. At some point, it was just healthy for us to put something out there and get that early. It also gives a bit of, a boost to the team, to kind of not sit with the product for too long. You end up thinking everything is the worst because you all the time have problems to solve. And whenever you play a playtest, even no matter how great it is, all the things that still is missing and is not working as intended, even if they're great. So getting external feedback is nice. After that, we had I think our first playtest that we actually did on Epic Games Launcher, which was like, well, one thing to test, right? Actually making sure does this work for a launcher and figuring out all of those problems, because it's not just making the game, it's also all of the game services and providing and kind of like if the player can't install it, well, you lost the player right there. There's a lot of other steps that goes into acquiring your player base. There's a bit of testing our like tech requirements kind of goes in there. And there we had much more of a loop, but still very much isolated on a slip world. That was a bigger world now with a lot more teams, much more of a directed experience. You had something almost like upgrades of equipment. It was a very limited loop, but we at least got some things proven in like the exploration, the collaboration in harvesting, the collaboration and kind of fighting each other with other teams, the world feeling alive, the going from one area to another, like it kind of expanding out, exploring in the world, and then fighting a boss. Like suddenly we were trying a lot more things in a bigger scale, which definitely we learned a lot from and helped with some stuff. I think like some big things we learned there was that we used to always spawn at what we call like landing pads. You would fly down there and you would go out and do stuff and come back to the landing pad and you would leave at the landing pad. And it ended up with a lot of back and forth in the same area, which was kind of not interesting exploration wise. So a big shift for me there in design was like, we'll plop you down somewhere random. We might add the option in the future to like pick where on like a grid or something like that. But it's like somewhere random, your team will go, and then, well, you need to get out of here. Good luck finding an extraction site. Figure out where you are, what things are available to you around. And then last we had a play test for GDC this year, so in like early March, where we were kind of showing a lot more variety. So we had like 3 biomes. We had just added more weapons. We had added more creatures. We had added more movement abilities. And what was the last thing? Yes, we had just added like the roguelike elements, which I think we haven't talked a lot about yet, and it might be a deep dark place to go because it's one of the more complex parts of the game. You wouldn't think, right? The game is more not complex enough already, but we added a system we call like shards and memoria. The idea that the players, they will have to kill creatures, harvest stuff, and you do so anyway for progression. But while doing so, you almost collect like, we call it memoria, and it's like a currency that you then spend for temporary power-ups while you're on the slip world. And that was something we actually learned from the previous the previous playtest. It was nice on the slip world to have this personal progression. You would spend resources to get some upgrades, and that was something we initially just added to get that sense of, well, imagine that if between every upgrade you had gone back to your homestead to craft something, we kind of proved that, yeah, it's nice to come back and I can do more things. That is something we still want in the game, but it was also really exciting to actually progress within that same session. And it solved one of the problems that we knew that both that survival games usually have, and even MMOs have in a lot of cases, which is, well, you're going to run out of content. You're going to hit some place where it's like, well, I've crafted everything. Maybe I don't have the couch with your face on it yet, but I don't care. It's not really going to, show me something new, give me a new experience. It's just a decoration piece. Some people will care a lot. Some people won't. So we knew that with survival games, we would kind of run out at some point. And since we're a game that's very much, we know that our player count will kind of rise and fall depending on seasons and stuff like that. But in order to have a game that doesn't, just fall flat when you deplete it of content, we wanted that you could go to slip worlds just for fun. You shouldn't just have to go there because there's a carrot on a stick that's like new equipment, new progression, new worlds to go to. It could just be, well, last weekend I was playing with my friends and I got these random power-ups like you do in roguelikes, and that combination was so fun. I'm hoping to get it again.
This
A
is so
similar
cool.
experience is also what you have in battle royales. It's the whole like you go to a place you didn't expect. The circle shrinks in a certain way. Uh, you get 30 third party, a ship like a drop ship comes in and drops like a box with loot you haven't found before. Like these unique emergent events creates fun experience that you kind of chase over and over again. Roguelikes are the same. Like you want that unique combination of stuff. Um, so we kind of added that in to get that sense of you can just go to a slip world for the, you know, for playing around, for
How
just
did you
powering up in there.
how did you learn this?
How I learned
No,
what.
no, no. How did you
But
learn about like that making progression within the slip world makes sense and adds and it might be a good idea? Like, how, did you was this from the feedback? Was it
it was both from feedback, but and I think also some like the problem that I just brought up was something I had been raising quite a bit earlier, and we were discussing a lot of what should the progression look like, and I was looking a lot of at a WoW mod called like Ascension or something like that, where when players level up, they get like random abilities from any class. So it
okay?
feels like you always like get a random build, and that's exciting in a way. And it's also kind of like what you do in some like in auto chess games, right? It's like you have some control over which units you get and when you get them, but it's like these random combinations. Like that sense of like it always turns out in a different way is a nice replayable experience. So I like that, and then suddenly we had that progression from the previous playtest that people were really liking. Like it was fun to upgrade. It was great to have those steps. Other than just the sense of I need to extract something valuable, otherwise all of my time is wasted. At least you just had some like some level ups that just felt good. Similar how you do in like MOBAs. It's like yeah, when my character levels up, when I buy new equipment, when I it's just different when we kill like a boss and it gives us a temporary buff. All of these things that are just like nice positive reinforcements was something that clearly kind of made the game, or it solved some problems, but it also like made the game even more complex at the same time.
Yeah.
I think that's always a trade-off, right? How many problems do you want to try and solve? And there we're a game that is definitely maybe trying to be a bit bigger than our team is suited for right now. But we're quite, I would say, nicely seated. We have time to develop and are kind of just trusting the process and the
Okay.
vision.
Okay. Nice. So, were there any other things that you learned from feedback after the playthroughs and after the playtests? Have you had a automated way of gathering the feedback?
No, we have not.
Okay.
That's like analytics and stuff like that. We haven't added.
Okay. Okay.
It's
So it
something we
was
will have in future playtests when we have the blockchain. We'll be able to see all the transactions, right? Like
yes.
what resources are people getting a lot? What crafting are they doing a lot? So that is something that will be very exciting.
Okay. Okay. So are there other things that you learned from the playtest sessions?
A lot of things. I think most of it was how it's not a simple game we're making, and there needs to be a lot of tutorialization, and also where does that exist quite well. So I think mostly just kind of like making us focus on those topics we were already kind of aware of. But it also kind of gave us some clear thumbs up and like, yeah, the thing you're doing here, people are liking, and you can do more of that, but you're steering in this direction. Like, I think we could probably have gotten more if we had the analytics and stuff like that. But initially, it was just like getting a whole, like, yeah, this feels bad, this feels good. Like we got comments that was clearly like making things, helping us understanding where we should take the design.
Okay, that's really cool. Really cool. Okay, we talked about the game loop outside of Slip Worlds, right? You go into Slip World, you get stuff, then you go to the homestead. You mentioned now the roguelike aspect. So each time you get to the slip world, you have also a mini progression within the slip world.
Yes.
And you're mentioning that this is happening through these shards that you collect from enemies, and then you can do something with it. What, for me, when I think about it, it's kind of, there are two conflicting things, right? On one hand, I have a loot that I'm getting from my homestead, and some abilities that I can, for example, a gun that deals some amount of damage. And then you have a shards that they also need to influence you some way. What do you see, like, which aspects could be influenced within the slip world from the memory shards, and which aspects of the gameplay should be steered through the loot that you carry through?
That's a good question. I'm just seeing how, in which order I'm going to explain these different things. So the way we're approaching it is that players, ideally, I'm going to back up even more. So what we were seeing was also like with the blockchain and with the concern of pay to win, we wanted to do something where like most of the power was coming from the shards. If we did something where like, let's say 20% of your power was coming from equipment, then that should ideally be enough that players do want the better equipment. Maybe also just because it's nice to show off your achievements. You think the mesh looks good. You specialize, in fire resistance, so you can go to the desert that has a lot of heat, or like these different choices you make beforehand that kind of prepares you for the slip world. And then on the slip world, it's much more of the LAR on top that is more direct power. And some of the more obvious ones, but less interesting, is just like add damage, add fire rate, add health, add shield. These things the player can easily go, yes, now this will make me stronger. And we can balance some things like elite creatures and bosses to be like, yeah, you probably will have a very bad time trying to fight those without any shards. And then in that way, we kind of split the two progression tracks. You have a sense of, let's say we have 4 biomes in the game. Well, if you want to have a good time in the frozen biome, you need equipment with frost resistance. And the first time you go there, you're not going to have any. So it's first you survive, you struggle, you try just to get some resources to maybe get one piece of frost resistance. You'll do a bit better, get more frost resistance to the point where you should have enough that you'll have a better time fighting a boss, which can give you a different armor set that might not be specialized in frost resistance, but might have some other unique things on it. And most of those unique things are things that actually interact with the shards. And the goal kind of becomes that the players will want, some of this boss equipment and some of this biome equipment, all for the reason that when they put shards into it, it's going to behave in a certain way, which is kind of the roguelike aspects of it, right? I think maybe I can give some examples of some cooler effects other than just health, shield, and damage, because they're kind of boring. Some stuff could be like, if you jump while crouch sliding, you'll do a long, fast velocity jump forward. Could be like a unique shard you could equip. Or whenever you fire a bullet with the automatic rifle, the fire rate increases. So instead of your bullet going, it goes and it doesn't have to necessarily be that much more powerful, but that's going to feel fun. The audio will be different. The camera shake will be a bit different. The VFX is going to be different. It's going to be pressing the button is fun in a new way. And it's going to stand out to you as a cool experience. But that's kind of where we make the separation, right? It's your preparation that gives you a start-off point to which content are you going to excel in. And then it's filling that with power so that you can deal with bosses. And then I think that is like the acquisition of power which is from the memoria and the shard, is I think kind of in 2 layers. So remember the thing I said with like the 20% power from the equipment and the 80% from the shards. There's also a bit of like, how fast are you getting that power within the slip world? Which one thing can depend on, well, how many shards can you put into the equipment? That kind of sets the roof for how much power you can get. And then there is the sense of like, well, where are you getting shards from? So you can imagine that we have points of interest where you can open alien chests and they have shards. But you also have massive structures where you pay with memoria and there's a limited amount of them in the world. So players will kind of like meet in these areas again to make the world feel alive and shared. But that's also risky. If you go there, you could drop your inventory. You could lose the memorial that you haven't spent yet, and that gives you a different amount of power. So imagine that the player might be able to get 50% out of the 80 total you could get from shards kind of easily. And it's all potential power, right? Because you could also just get some shards that are not that great. Or you could just get the ones that are just like this shit. Which again is to the varied gameplay, to the replayability, the emerging gameplay that we're going for. And then the last like 30% out of 80 is more like, yeah, if you spend longer time in the slip world, if you do the more risky stuff, you can get that more power, but that might also mean you can kill that one boss you might be able to more confidently kill 4. And it means that depending on your, like, let's say you don't want to kill bosses. Maybe you don't care too much about powering up. Maybe you'll just be fine with getting that 50%, which should allow you to at least compete with other players. But maybe not, like, maybe on paper you're not as strong stat-wise, but we're also a third-person shooter, right? There's also just game knowledge, dodging, shooting. Hopefully all of these complex things balance themselves out is the goal. Because, yeah, maybe you don't want to fight bosses. Maybe you don't want to fight other players, but I mean, who says no to a power up if it's just there on the ground? Might as well take it just to be safe and then go on with your harvesting, right? Is kind of the thought. It's leveling up always feels good, even if it gets taken away from you when you leave the slip world.
Yeah. Okay.
There's a lot of thoughts in it.
Yeah. This is why I like to pick your brains about like things like that, because you clearly have spent lots of time thinking through this. And like if you say, oh, it's memory shards because there's a progression within the slip world, like it's just scratching the surface, like you have so much stuff that you thought through. Okay, we've talked for almost an hour. Maybe tell me a little bit, apart from the design aspects, where the game is at in terms of the state. And
where are we with the state? So right now, we're working, I think I mentioned a few things, right? Like we're starting we're procedure generating worlds right now. Finally, I don't have to like manually stitch them together to get something that like tries and communicates the game well. Now we're procedure generating worlds. Great. We're doing different biomes. Great. They have different content. Amazing. And then we're starting to do like matchmaking and, kind of like party stuff, more of like not just in like you have a party in the slip world, but you can actually form a party outside of it, that in a lobby. A lot of the things that stitches a lot of the base together is what we're getting. And ultimately what that will mean is that suddenly we can start doing a full game loop. So in design, at least, we're working very heavily on progression, as well as also kind of all the UX that makes all this stitched nicely together. And then the details that goes into every biome, right? So because we're getting multiple biomes, you kind of want the experience to be a bit different, not just in exploration, but also like what challenges are you getting in one place or the other? What rewards are you getting? So that's kind of like down to the details. Then we have more of the just supporting tech in the whole, how is things going to flow? Same with the blockchain there, also like making sure the economy, the progression is kind of ready for that. But we're really working hard on so I want, variations of weapons. What resources should I be harvesting? How long should it take? What rewards are we giving the player after the tutorial, just to make sure that you're constantly kind of like keeping the players engaged, right? Like if you play for 5 hours and get no feeling of progression, you probably have quit 2 hours ago and then you didn't even play 5 hours. So it's like, how often do you need to reward the player? At what point do we just kind of like let go and let's say, well, this is at your own pace now? It's a lot of the things to think about. And it's probably the thing we're spending the most time on. For everyone else, well, it's a lot of features coming together. So there's a lot of like, well, okay, now we have procedure generating worlds and we have bosses that we're producing a lot better than we've been doing before. But hey, the nav mesh just broke, so let's fix that. It's a lot of moving ball parts, but it's also faster than ever. Like we have been producing our armors for like a year now. We know we already have the integrated pipeline from art, but also the system that stitches things together in tech, and then design can just set up the items, and then all of the like more of the pipelines and the content is much clearer than it's been before. So it's moving really fast on the things we're more proven in, but we also, then stitching everything together. So we're kind of finishing up what would be moving towards early access kind of content, and just working on, making that quality better, getting all of it stitched in, while in design also making sure that, well, there's a lot of room to grow, to make new biomes in the future, to add systems on top, to expand with more shards, equipment, to finally get your face on the couch. Like it's kind of finally, the game is coming together, and there's a lot of working on that, but also kind of making sure that it's future proven all the time, right? Because we worked on some system a year ago and it's working really well, but now we're learning more things. And we need to tweak some things, expand on it so that it can work on these future ideas as well. So I want to say it sounds like we're working on everything, but no, it's a lot of like the game actually finally coming together. It's no longer just playing on a slip world. The next open play test players will go between different slip worlds, and they will actually have clear goals when in there, depending on what they're chasing and why should they go to one slip or the other, and which order should they do stuff, which is hard, what is easy. Those kind of things is kind of coming together, and that's nice. After like 2.5 years, it's fun.
Yeah. Have you announced already the next playtest?
No, we have not. There's a lot of events coming by the end of the summer. I don't know if it's there, but we're definitely working really hard right now to get something ready.
Okay. That's great. Can you mention where people can follow the Providence development?
Yes, I think the best way to follow it is on Twitter. I am definitely not prepared to say just this is the hyperlink or something like that. But I would say we have a website for Providence, but that one's
all of the links we'll put in the description.
Sounds good. Yeah. Well, I would say the Providence Twitter, maybe the Dynasty as well, if you're more interested, and also the team, like what we're doing around it as well, because we're not just working on the game. Where it's like we also have a blockchain team, and that team is kind of working heavily together with people that kind of have a social space for blockchain development in Istanbul. So there's a lot of that is a part of marketing in the game. So if you think the company is also interesting, I would follow that. And then our Discord is more on the intimate level. The social posts for Twitter kind of go in there. Sometimes you'll see developers pop in and talk about stuff. And there's I should think right now there's a what's that called? I think they call them spaces now.
I think you have a huge Discord, and that's also the first time I hear somebody saying Discord is intimate.
I mean, at least I think so, compared to Twitter, right? Like,
that's true.
At the same time, it's also a lot of people within Web3. Some people are interested in games, others are just interested in speculation about tokenized stuff. So that's a lot of just people writing GM or hello Gens and stuff like that, which is very new and weird to us. But there's memes in there. There's some fan art. There's people making AI music about the game. There's sometimes me writing this is happening right now, and we're excited to share that with you. And overall, it's just our place to share the game and or the progress, and kind of get more by, I would say, core both player base. So we have what we call our OGs. They're kind of the people that follow us the longest, who are most dedicated to the project, who help kind of share it and be kind of I want to say advocates, but that's not the word, ambassadors of the game.
Okay.
And they also get a bunch of information early. They help bring new people aboard. They get to play test when you do not. So they have some benefits, right? So it's more intimate to the people who care. I think looking at right now, we have something just below 13,000, which is definitely, I think, more than I expected. But a lot of these also just people that are, waiting for something more real to happen, where right now it's in the early stages. But we're looking at all the feedback, all the comments on both the more real marketing pieces, but also the goofy ones that we have.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the discussion and walking
through
lots of the design thinking and thought process. behind
Yeah, I mean,
Providence.
it's always nice to share. It's also nice for me sometimes to, reflect a bit back on like where all of these ideas came from and what actually is like take a step back and look at that, because sometimes you get hyper focused on the things you're working on and like in the office every day, but most of the ideas actually came from a place at some point, and now we're making them. It's fun. Game development is a lot of challenges, but it's a lot of fun, especially if you feel like the team you have around you is bringing something to the table as well, like challenging you, thinking about problems you haven't, giving you new ideas. Like it's not like all of the ideas are just mine in every way. No, it's most often like some kind of like core thing, and then the solutions come from somewhere else, and the ideas for how to improve something or how to make a fantasy better or something else. And that's something that's nice about being a small team. And I think we're trying to remain as such as long as it makes sense. But it's a big game we're making, so it might be
Yeah,
that we need
huge
some
as game.
more.
Huge
Yeah,
as game and complex.
it's, yes. So we might need some more people at some point, just so that I can go home a bit earlier, right? Will be great. But right now, at least it makes sense that we're not too many, because it's also like a lot to manage being a lot of people. And well, Dynasty has only been for what, 3 years. Logi artists, sure, for I think 13 at this point. At least our CIO and our CEO have been working on it for 13 years, myself for 6, but we're not all that experienced, right? We're quite junior team in a lot of areas.
Okay. Okay, I'm super excited for Providence. So
Yeah,
if there will be a new playtest, you can count me in.
I'll be sure to hit you up with it. And thank you so much for having me on the talk. It's been a lot of fun.